Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Rational Standard podcast. I'll be hosting this week. My name is Nicholas Woode-Smith, and I'm the managing editor of the Rational Standard. Joining me is the usual suspects, Martin van Staden, Zakhele Mthembu, and David Ansara. This week, we've got three topics on the agenda. First, we'll be discussing a new report by the Free Market Foundation, the Brussels Effect report, that goes into the usual bad habit that our government seems to have of copying bad advice from other countries that's completely unusable in our contexts. Luckily, we've got two authors of the report on stream with us now, Martin and Zakhele. Martin, can you begin and just tell us a bit about the report?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. So I would encourage everyone to either read the report, which is on the Free Market Foundation website, or to watch our formal launch event that was earlier this week. So that'll be on the Free Market Foundation's YouTube channel where we did a live stream. But kind of just a very broad level summary is that the Brussels effect is this idea that the European Union specifically is a big market. Companies all around the world want access to that market, and therefore, if they do want access, they have to comply, obviously, with EU rules. But then what do the countries that they operate from, like South Africa, tend to do? Well, they call it a race to the top of regulation, where because all these companies now have they've created compliance for the higher level regulation of the EU. The countries kind of then raise their domestic regulations to meet that anyway, because companies don't want to kind of have various different levels of compliance. They're all just going to comply with one standard. And what that means that the EU's regulatory logic kind of radiates outward, outside of the EU. And this is something the EU is extremely proud of. Dr. Mornay Malan, who's also been a participant on the show, he kind of put this very well on at the launch. He said that we don't call it, or they don't call it, the Brussels side effect. It's not a side effect that, oh my goodness, now a bunch of countries are complying with this. No, they're very excited about the fact that the EU is effectively exporting regulation. There's that saying of America innovates, China replicates, and the EU regulates. I'm a little bit more I'm a little bit less, let's say, against the Chinese. So I say that America innovates, Asia produces, and the EU regulates. And you can see this. The EU is getting left behind in AI and a lot of digital innovations, where both Asia and the US are kind of showing them their heels. Unfortunately, the South African political class, and this is what we get into in the report, the South African political class loves Europe. They like saying, colonialism and imperial, but they love Europe. They absolutely love Europe. You saw this when this kerfuffle of the US also began. A bunch of our ministers said, no, the Europeans are with us. Yes. So there's a very close, I would say, ideological bond between the ANC, specifically the ANC's regulatory mindset, and the regulatory mindset that you see in European welfare regulatory states. So a lot of these things that the EU does, South Africa sees, and they're like, that is cool, we're going to do that as well in South Africa. But as you said, Nicholas, it's those regulations are already harmful to the European economy. Europeans are not kind of happy with these regulations, but at least Europe's economy has a hope in hell of complying with these things. Whereas in South Africa, it's applying a very luxurious level of regulation to, in some cases, an industry that doesn't exist. There's no AI industry in South Africa, and already our government is talking about, we need to plan how we're going to regulate AI in South Africa, and we need to follow global best practice and so on. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, we haven't even given the baby a chance to be born, and you already want to regulate it. So we at the FMF, we launched this report in association with EPICENTRE, the European Policy Information Center, which is based in Brussels, and the IATP, the Initiative for African Trade and Prosperity, which is based at the University of Buckingham in the UK. So we're pointing this out. A lot of our colleagues on the African continent, if we get together at our yearly events, they often say, yes, the Europeans are really making it difficult for us, specifically in stuff like energy and agricultural policy as well. This report focused specifically on digital policy, but there's many other places to kind of look at and see exactly how Brussels is dictating a regulatory logic to us. I won't say that they're dictating the minutia of regulation to us, but certainly a mindset and a regulatory logic that we are getting from the Europeans, when I think we should be looking at the US, Singapore, and kind of some other places that have a better regulatory mindset than Brussels, at least for now, I would say.
I think what stands out is that we don't want to do the bare minimum of policy shifts to try to maintain a GOA or our positive relations with the United States, which is a far more profitable trade partner. But we're willing to bend over backwards for regulations that just completely do not work in our context. I know, for one, as a business owner who has had to work with GDPR regulations before this, I just gave up. I just don't even do that side of the business in EU things anymore. And I probably will give up if it's applied here as well. Zakhele, you're co-author of the report as well. Would you like to add?
Oh yeah, I was still muted there, but yeah, I guess Martin has pretty much covered what the Brussels effect is. My contribution to the report really was limited to the competition law side of things, and the Digital Markets Act, and how pretty much that, I think, is one of the clearest examples of the Brussels effect, right? Because the Competition Commission has cited the Digital Markets Act, and I think certain regulations that emanate from it directly in their, I think, market inquiries, right? And has made recommendations pertaining to that. I'm probably thinking that we may see at like the highest level an amendment to the Competition Act itself that may try to bring it in line more with like some of the provisions of the Digital Market Act. But the fact that the Commission can have inquiries and make recommendations that are influenced in part by international best practice is what they would call it, right, already means that maybe the amendment is not necessary. But yeah, it is pretty insidious, as Martin has said, particularly with like I focused on like the what's this market inquiry, the intermediate platforms market inquiry, where they talk about gatekeeper platforms and platforms that are able to do self-preferencing, that have platforms that are open to other people whilst they also simultaneously are selling other things. And this is e-commerce in South Africa, and I know when I was doing research, I saw how e-commerce is probably one of our strongest economic sectors, that and all of the sectors connected to it, like the courier services. These are industries in South Africa that have like one of the few that have seen tremendous growth within our low growth environment. And it seems like the Competition Commission, in wanting to apply what they call international best practice, isn't aware of this. And I think the effects of that are pretty insidious, right? And we're seeing it in Europe, as Martin mentioned, that they are now seeing the heels of markets like China and the US due to their overregulation. And when you then take the context to us, we've already been seeing the heels of all these big economies. So the prospect of us, prospering and improving our conditions to even try to catch up to these economies becomes nearly impossible. But we have regulators, we have legislators who, I don't know why they don't see this entire picture. I guess replicating European standards is okay in some manner, whilst it is not in other manners, right? So yeah, really, that is my contribution. It sucks. It sucks. It is a form of European imperialism, and it's seemingly accepted, which is pretty unfortunate. But yeah, it was nice working on the report at the very least to show that something like this does exist, and hopefully we can try and change it.
I think keeping in mind the recent comments by President Ramaphosa about lauding Zimbabwe's land reform projects and implying that we should emulate it, I think that you probably find that the EU was doing something actually competent, then we would definitely not want to do it. David, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, look, Ronald Reagan once said that, and you could apply this to the EU, that government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. And yeah, so I think that's probably the guiding philosophy of some of the bureaucrats. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we might have to organize our own Brexit campaign here in South Africa to secede from the European Union. I didn't realize that we had signed up for it. But jokes aside, I think it's very interesting. I mean, in amongst policymaking circles, there's often this reference to global best practice, which is a well-worn phrase. And you really need to sort of unpick it a little bit and, well, pick it apart and unpack it. And yeah, there's just this assumption that what happens in developed countries must be automatically good for South Africa. I mean, I think energy policy is a really good example of this. And the EU in particular has really driven renewables very hard and compelled the rest of the world to sign up for the Paris Accords. There's the CBAM. I always forget the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I was very pleased to see that one of my YouTube interviews was referenced in the citations of the report. A couple of years ago in a previous role, I interviewed Andre de Ruyter, and Martin likes to bring this up in such conversations where he was explaining how Eskom needs to tilt towards renewables. And I said, well, but, we sit on one of the world's largest coal deposits. Surely we'd be foolish to ignore that. And we have this installed coal capacity that could be refurbished and revitalized. And he said, well, look at things like CBAM. If our heavy industry wants to export to the European Union, they're going to impose these restrictions on us. And I think it's such a good example of how other countries are sort of compelled to follow the lead. And I think we should be a bit skeptical of it. So I think also this just really demonstrates, I think, the problems with over-regulation. And I think one of the issues is like a problem will be identified or some kind of challenge like data protection. I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had around how companies use data and privacy issues and so on. But then it's like, okay, well, let's just regulate it. If it moves, tax it. If it stops moving, regulate it. But the costs are never considered. And we've often spoken about Henry Hazlitt's phrase about the seen and the unseen effects. And there's this hubris that I think guides a lot of regulatory action, which is like, well, we're dealing with the problem. So regardless of the effects, you must just accept how we are handling this. And one of the issues is also that the costs are kind of are unseen. So the regulation might be seen, you might be actually dealing with the problem in some capacity, but the costs are kind of diffused throughout the system. And so you don't really see the cost of millions of people whenever they open their internet browser having to click allow all cookies or whatever. It's seemingly insignificant, just a few seconds of somebody's time. But if you accumulate that across the whole of the internet using society, it's actually quite a significant cost, and it throws sand in the gears of your daily interactions in your daily life, and actually kind of impossible to really fully quantify, but it is a cost. So I think that's one of the reasons why we advocate for no regulation, or where regulation is needed, very light touch regulation. And I think the other feature of some of these bureaucracies is that they tend to self-reproduce and justify their own existence by seeking out so-called problems that might not actually be problems. That might just be part of the reality of daily life. But now you have a whole EU bureaucracy that's tasked with dealing with these things, and it needs to justify its existence. So, yeah, I think a lot of issues to unpack there.
I think a common problem that our government has is that it always wants to sprint before it even knows how to crawl. I think that they focus on the results of these developed countries, as you mentioned. They'll focus on what EU is doing now, what Japan is doing now, what Singapore is doing now, but they don't see all the steps that it took to get there. Europe didn't become a industrial powerhouse because it was overregulated and had a bureaucracy regulating the shape of bananas. They were incredibly laissez-faire. There was a reason that that Marxism actually was founded in Europe. It wasn't because that's what people were thinking. It was because it was a response to the huge laissez-faire culture that pervaded Europe at the time. In fact, maybe that's a problem how laissez-faire it is, because we got Marxism out of it. Yes, David?
Yeah, so I mean, look, some of these things are merely inconvenient, but other global regulations that are imported to South Africa can actually have some really extremely damaging effects. I mean, if you consider during the COVID crisis, the global best practice was whatever the World Health Organization mandated you to do. And in the beginning of the pandemic, they were saying, no, there's no need for masks. And then 2 weeks later, they were saying, no, everybody has to have a mask and it should be mandatory. And it was just, thou shalt not question the regulatory overlords. Where is the WHO sit? Is it in Italy or in Switzerland somewhere?
I think it's in Geneva, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so I think you also have to be a bit cautious. I mean, and it's not something that only characterizes the ANC, which has a penchant for intervention. I mean, if you look at the DA's manifesto, a lot of what they talk about is, we need to align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But I'll challenge anybody here to kind of name more than 2 or 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, it's some of them are actually quite pernicious, some of these goals, like a lot of positive rights assertions around right to water and food and so on. You definitely need food and water, but who provides that? Is it the market or the state? And I think a lot of the United Nations directives are very state-led in terms of their bias. So I think we're not just being curmudgeonly free marketeers here. I think there's actually life and death matters that are at play here.
I was also just that maybe think that maybe it is some sort of Eurocentric bias, because the Washington Consensus, everyone cries the bogeyman of neoliberalism being imposed on African states. But I challenge you to find a single African state who actually adopted the Washington Consensus, even though they complained about it destroying and wrecking their local economies. Yet so many of these countries will pay lip service to following these regulations, which I will also say in practice, they do not have the capacity to actually enforce. But they'll be enforced in South Africa, at the very least, on a large formal basis that will hold back our economy, while our informal economy will fortunately be able to ignore it to a large degree. Now, any other input on this topic before we move to the next one?
Yeah, I think I can just add to that, which is something you alluded to, and David as well, is that kind of the place where these regulations come from is, I mean, I usually describe it as a very academic kind of ivory tower place, but I mean, to some degree, it is applicable in Europe. So the kind of disconnect is that a European politician, I would say your average European politician, understands your average European experience. So a member of the Swiss parliament probably walks around on the streets of Zurich or Bern or Geneva and kind of gets how things work in that society. In Africa, I think it's the story is completely different. So we send from Africa these politicians to go to Geneva, to go to New York, either to go to Addis Ababa, and then they sit around, they're like, okay, we have to do this thing, that thing, and the other thing in line with global best practice. But none of them represent what actually happens in Africa. Like, African politicians do not live as the average African lives. Like, that's just a non-starter. So there is a double kind of disconnectedness from these regulations and actual practical reality in this country. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa, he does not shop at spaza shops. Like, people think he's this kind of representative of kind of the people. I mean, Julius Malema is the socialist, charismatic leader who represents the people. None of these people shop at spaza shops. None of these people drink their daily beer at a tavern, at a normal South African tavern. They live as if they are in Brussels. Like Cyril Ramaphosa and Julius Malema's daily experience is as if they are in a European capital city. So when we go to Parliament, or when they go to Parliament and they adopt these things and these regulations that kind of are now applicable on our economy, they think, yeah, of course, the Europeans are doing it, and they're successful, and I mean, there's no reason that we can see that it won't work here, so let's do it. And I just think that's just another point in favor of kind of why decentralization is so important, and why all these things kind of come together at some point. You actually need your politicians who ostensibly have a kind of a democratic mandate to actually get what it is that's happening and what it is that they're representing, and we are so far removed from that in South Africa. Again, I just go back to this AI thing. I think if you speak to the people at the Department of Communications and you tell them, like, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to regulate AI. What AI are you regulating in South Africa? They will be kind of, they won't understand what you're trying to say. They'll be like, oh no, Chat GTP and Grok and all these things. I mean, they're in South Africa. And it's like, listen, if your regulations make it difficult for them to operate here, they will just make the service unavailable in South Africa. This is something that Meta did in Canada, I think. When Canada did something like Jake spoke about the Competition Commission regulations, Canada tried that a few years ago, and they said, okay, the news media in Canada, the traditional press, they're very unhappy that they're not getting money from Meta sharing their links. So now we're imposing all these antitrust regulations on Meta to kind of compensate the news publications. And Facebook was like, that's a great idea. I think we're going to make Facebook's news feed unavailable to Canadian users. So problem solved. So if you're on Facebook in Canada and someone tries to share a Canadian news platform, the link won't go through. It will say we cannot share this post. Job well done. So that's the kind of thing that we can expect in South Africa if we push ahead with all of this luxurious regulations. These massive international companies aren't going to bend to the will of us trying to implement European-esque policies, and we're going to snuff out whatever local tech industry we would have had instead. So yeah, it's I think just to say that we need to be very aware of the disconnect that exists not just between South Africa and Europe, but between the lived reality in South Africa and the politicians who bind us to these European regulations.
I think we need to remember that I think you wrote a document for the Free Market Foundation about cloud computing in South Africa, correct? I remember a few years ago.
No, that was not me. That was a little bit before my time. But yeah, we've been in that space as well. Yeah.
And I just think it's important to mention that Amazon Web Services, I would think the largest cloud computing infrastructure in the world, I stand to be corrected, its technology was founded in Cape Town. Yet it's not here anymore because our regulations and our entire institutions just shoved it out. And we're risking doing that again with the fledgling AI industry, because I do know that there are software engineers in South Africa who are incredibly talented and are working in that space, but they're not going to be for much longer. Zex, do you have any closing comments for this topic?
No, man, I think, Martin, all you guys have pretty much summed it all up, right? So I think the most important point really is the killing of industry, because that can never be truly quantified, which, as I said, sucks, right? Because you don't see the potential. Not only can you explain it to the people themselves, but I think Martin made a great point about how, we just have different lived realities. The people who lead us, who bind us to said regulations, do not understand. Maybe if you give them the benefit of the doubt, that they just do not get it. So they think that the European regulations can apply to us, even in labor, right? When you talk of labor legislations, people who are at the forefront for propagating for stronger labor protections, as they would call them, protections, or any form of third-party third partyism, as I would call it, from the state, right? Because they are huge fans of being third parties to contracts. They don't live the reality of, you know, a business owner, a small business owner who has to comply with all of these things and is just turned off from hiring someone new, or even worse now with like this immigration problem, probably hires an illegal immigrant, knowing that, you know, they don't have to deal with all of that. They don't care, I guess, because they don't get it. Because to them, they go to businesses that are fairly, I guess, well established, and to them, they're like, oh, I'm doing good because I'm protecting all these employees that I get to interact with all the time. But the large majority of the country is pretty much using, you know, developed world laws to try and get itself to be developed. And as you said, Nicholas, like the reason Marxism existed in Europe is because they were pretty laissez-faire. So to get to the point of needing these, you know, left-leaning legislations or provisions, you have to be laissez-faire. But, you know, I'm kind of preaching to the choir, I'm sure, because this is what we are always telling these people to be, but they do not listen. So yeah, it is pretty unfortunate. And as I said, it's like it's imperialism, an accepted form, voluntary imperialism, if you were to think of it like that, which is pretty interesting considering, you know, the attitudes in the academia with like decolonizations and things like that being in the mainstream. You also simultaneously have willing imperialist submission, which is always, you know, something interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also just a broader point to be made here around accountability of regulators. And I don't think this is a uniquely South African problem or even a European problem, but it's a global problem where, I mean, everybody you speak to thinks democracy is a good idea, but people seem to overlook the fact that there's very little so-called democratic accountability when it comes to a lot of these kinds of institutions. And I mean, if you look at a lot of the rise of populism in Europe at the moment, I would argue that, yeah, maybe some of the vectors for that are hot issues like immigration. But I think people also feel a real disconnect from the elites, the anointed ones who run some of these institutions. I mean, if you think of Ursula von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, I mean, she's not directly elected by the people of Europe. I mean, she kind of led she was elected into the EU Parliament, but I think I stand under correction, but I think it's the Commission itself that basically elects its representatives. I mean, if you think of somebody like Christine Lagarde, I mean, she really epitomizes the elite aristocracy that really dominates in European politics at the moment. She was French finance minister. She was the head of the IMF, which typically goes to a European. Now she's the governor of the European Central Bank, the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, I don't know. The lawyers on the pod can maybe tell me about that, but as far as I know, those are kind of appointed by the Commission itself, and they make directives that member states have to comply with. And yeah, maybe some people would say, well, that's a feature of representative democracy where you don't make all decisions. It's not Athens in 400 BC. But I would say that if you look at the general trend over time, the growth of these kinds of unelected bureaucracies has, gone up exponentially. And I would not say that the governance metrics have improved commensurably. So yeah, I think this speaks to a kind of a broader malaise politically that's developing. And when there are legitimate issues that people want to address, like immigration, I mean, I think we're a pretty pro-immigration bunch, but I think also people feel like their voices are being ignored, and that's creating a lot of radical populist reaction, which has all sorts of other secondary effects.
I think that's a good place to move on to a topic which is closer to home, because we definitely have a growth of executive overreach, and our representatives don't really seem to care what we want. So the two next topics for this episode kind of relate. One of them, which has been in the news a lot, is the a video from 2023 that's been making the rounds on Twitter, where Alexander Kahnemeyer, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the human resource manager at Stellenbosch Municipality, a video circulated of him complaining that they're struggling to find non-white male appointees for the municipality. And there's been a lot to say about this. People have said that the video is taken out of context. People saying it's been misreported. So to make sure that there's no confusion over the matter, I want to play the video for us here on the panel and for you there at home. So here it is.
From my perspective, I didn't support it. I feel we should have had the second, the internal candidate. I would propose that we go for the internal candidate, even be so, but I will write my report to Emma because she will have to sign off on the recommendation from you guys. But I have a big concern that we every time when we appoint somebody and come back, then we go to the highest score and it's always a white male. I believe that we are never going to get this organization right with that type of attitude. We are not going to transform and we're going to struggle years and years. I agree that we are far off, that we need people to come in now that can lead us, but I don't think we should just do it because people outside are complaining. What about our internal staff? I have a big concern within the infrastructure directorate where I have seen things happening, which is very concerning to me. I have made my sentiments known to you. I made it known to my director. I don't support what is going on currently in certain sections of infrastructure directors. I have a concern that we also have always whites in charge still in our technical services and water services. I have a problem with that because the message we're sending out to, especially internal staff, is they don't have the capability and the competency. Correct. Yeah. So I can unfortunately not support you, but I'm not a tenant. I can only advise. Yeah. But I will write that advice in a separate email to Emmet. So if she makes a decision contrary to what you guys decide, it may be that she now decided to take my advice. That's also. But I cannot support the fact that we every time appoint the best scoring candidate and it's always the white male. Yeah. So we're not going to go for gender-based anymore. We're not going to go. So we work to a fashion where we either make the life difficult for the person that came in, or and I'm not saying it happened, but I'm saying we make the life difficult for the person that came in, the person that resigns, and afterwards we get what we want. And I have already told you I have a concern with certain things that is happening in that section. And look, I try to follow that as much as possible, and I watch it very closely. And to the sense where we also asked Priyanka to write out a statement of for the exiting. And the long and the short of it is they actually got up like that. Yeah, obviously she's not going to write everything because I had a discussion with this. She's not going to write everything. Sure. That's why she came on you after that. Okay. Because I asked her to go and discuss it with me.
So that's the video that's been circulating. I don't know what the context was beforehand. Maybe the prefacing that he said everything I'm going to say for the next 2 minutes is sarcasm. Don't take any of it seriously. I doubt that's what he said, though. I think some of the crucial context to keep in mind, this is from 2023. I doubt that his views changed too much since then. And the fact that this does seem to be an official meeting on a municipal level, in a context where it shouldn't really matter the race or gender of the people in, especially if the only applicants they're really gating or qualifying are of a certain demographic. But let's start. Who wants to say something first about this?
Yeah, I guess there is something to say here, a lot to say. Firstly, I didn't know it was from 2023. I thought that it was now. So the fact that this has actually been going on And I mean, this was a Zoom meeting that was being recorded. So it's not a matter of kind of some secret meeting that no one knew about. There was him, who's the acting municipal manager or whatever. There was the other guy who seems to be in a position of authority sitting there. And obviously, the person recording it was also present at when this was said now 2 years ago. Now, the so the first thing to note, I guess, is that this is a DA municipality, and the DA has reacted kind of, let's say, very viscerally, saying, "Oh, this is unacceptable. We didn't know about this. We don't want this." And they're actually having a meeting today in the Stellenbosch municipality, the government, and they're now moving to remove this guy, Kanamair, from office, and it's going to take some time. They're going to do an investigation and all the trimmings, but I mean, I'm glad that they're doing that. I just think that it is a superficial gesture. However, I think that the way that he goes about engaging this topic shows that this is, and I'm willing to kind of go out on a limb here and say that this is not an isolated incident. This is a civil servant in a South African government bureaucracy saying that we need to transform our institution. This is not, no one listening now has heard this for the first time now, and I am fairly certain that this is something that you'll find in many DA governed municipalities as well. Why? And the DA reiterated this again, and it thinks it's doing such a good job every time it says this, but it reiterated again that they believe in the separation of party and state, effectively admitting that yes, this might be happening and we can't dictate to our kind of people and our governments what to do, so kind of we'll react to it when we discover it as the party, and we'll kind of send a strongly worded letter to our deployees in government and very kind of vociferously recommend that they do something about it. Whereas that is exactly the problem. That is exactly the problem. It is the separation of party and state. Like if a real good liberal party is elected to government, and the first thing it must say is that this is all over now, it's done. Like, if you are in a government that we manage, we will fire you. Like, there will be no, we won't be kind of nice about it. We're not going to go through official processes. You are done, whether you're ANC or, God forbid, you're appointed by us. Like, there is no question of this. It is over. But that is not what the DA does. It has been exposed to many decades of ANC corruption, and it thought the appropriate way to react to that is to say that they believe in the separation of party and state, trying to pretend like this is some great constitutionalist gesture, like the separation of church and state. When in fact, when they say that, they're actually just giving the finger to their voters, saying that we do not care that you voted for us. We do not care that you elected us based on our manifesto, because we can't do anything about it. You've put us in government, and there's a separation of party and state. So this manifesto is just our ideas about how things should kind of work. But what actually happens in our governments, that is for the civil service to deal with. And we believe in a professional, non-partisan civil service. So that is why things like this happen. Why? Because Andrew Kanamair was not vetted according to non-racialist principles. He was not vetted according to liberal individualism. He was not vetted according to his respect for, let's say, Hayek's isonomia, equality before the law. And then if you put that to the DA and you say, did you vet him according to Hayek's isonomia, they would be like, are you being silly? Of course we won't do something like that. Are you being academic? Separation of party and state. That's all it is. Like the EFF, if they go to government, they make sure that the people they put there understand Marxism-Leninism, they understand Fanonianism, they understand all these things. When the ANC, maybe a few years ago, when they put people in government, they make sure you are a card-carrying member of the South African Communist Party and that you understand at least the basics of these things. I think in the Freedom Front Plus, if you are kind of deployed on behalf of that party, they make sure that you speak Afrikaans, that you are a Calvinist, that you kind of adhere to some of the basic tenets of that party's worldview. The ACDP, you can't be an atheist if you are deployed by the ACDP. There are certain things that you have to believe if you are deployed on behalf of the ACDP. But good God, ladies and gentlemen, if you're deployed on behalf of the Democratic Alliance, we will not vet anything about you. You must just tick a box. You must be competent, and you must be kind of. You shouldn't have a criminal history, and there we go. There we go. No problem. Then you can become the municipal manager in a DA governed municipality. You could even become a mayor in a DA municipality. So yeah, I mean, stuff like this makes my blood boil because I have repeatedly given my vote to this party on the assumption, on the premise that I am a liberal voting for a liberal party that will deploy liberals into its liberal governments. Clearly, shame on me for doing that. And yes, I'm glad the DA is taking some action on this, and I'm sure this guy will be fired. I just don't think it solves the underlying issue, and it doesn't even recognize the underlying issue. So I'm quite frustrated about this. I really think it is happening all over the show, and we're just focusing on this instance because someone was brave enough, this whistleblower was brave enough to actually record it and to put it online.
I think the prevailing issue here is that the DA's taint has become so big that it's collapsing under its own weight. I think ideological training is, as you've mentioned, Martin, is essential for having a party. The problem is, I think that the DA, so many of its members just don't even understand what ideology is. I think you have a core group, like we all know some really good members of the DA here, but we also know that so many of them are always just going to fall for the prevailing cultural zeitgeist, which unfortunately because is dominated by the ANC and communists and the woke left, and maybe even shifting towards the woke right at this stage, but not so much here. Zex.
Yeah, as Martin said, right? It is, yeah. South Africa is weird. South Africa lives in this very weird place whereby people can pay taxes. For me, from a libertarian perspective, right, I'm like, if I pay taxes for any jurisdiction, I should, my race, my ethnicity should not matter. But if you want it to matter, then definitely if I pay my taxes, you have no right to say I cannot be involved in how these taxes are spent on a basic just justice level, right? It is something like, taxation without representation. And so, but like it is something that a lot of South African society accepts to some degree that, people can pay their taxes and you can not hire them because they're white. And in this instance, it is even much more messed up because the guy said that they are qualified, they are competent. So he's saying that he would not hire someone who's competent, who pays their taxes, who's clearly a part of the South African state, I'm sure, because they're white, not because they can't do their job. And I'm like, that is the wrong consideration. But that is something general, of course, But to Martin's point about the DA, I think it's an interesting thing. I like that they're gonna definitely respond, right? But I always love giving the benefit of the doubt to people. In the very least, Martin mentioned how the ANC trains people ideologically. I know a whole lot of ANC politicians. You are giving them so much credit. you are giving you you are giving them a whole lot. You're like the ANC in itself. You're giving it a whole lot. If there's one thing the ANC teaches its people is to eat. So self-interest. Really, that is the guiding principle. And of course, donating back to the party when you know that you have garnered something from self-interest. So I don't think that they vet people on the prescripts of what She did or Mao or Amilcar Cabral or it like this. Nah, they don't do that. So I don't think that as a response. Oh yeah, David, you can come in.
Is your average DA cadre more liberal than your average ANC cadre is more socialist?
I don't.
Like, who's more ideologically consistent?
Who's more ideologically consistent? I would actually lean towards the DA liberal. The DA has like people who support the DA generally have an idea of like the ideas they are voting for and people who are members of that party. I know people who are members of the ANC who know nothing about ideology, who don't care about ideology, who work in ANC municipalities right here in the COJ, who wouldn't even be able to tell you conference resolutions of the ANC, let alone a specific, ideological train of thought that is motivated by that. And that is why you see them, as I always make fun of them on social media, saying that, like, they are socialists, but they want the prosperity of small businesses. That connection between the ideology and the practical of it, they never make it because
Let me just
they
make
aren't so ideologically sound.
Let me just make a minor counterpoint to that, because so I get that, so I concede that. I agree that the ANC doesn't necessarily kind of take marks and put it on someone's desks and say, hey, go and kind of memorize Das Kapital now. I get that. But I think that the ANC, and I've said this before, they're more of a kind of a political movement that also has kind of a party, like that's part of it. They inculcate certain values, and I agree with you, it's all about eating. Ultimately it's about eating and extraction, but they do inculcate certain values in their members, and the way that I think that this is seen is that you as me as someone who engages with many people in various parties, I have come across accidental socialists in the DA, for instance, and it's happened often. I have come across people in the DA who say they believe in democratic socialism. They say it. And then you have classical liberals in the DA who I often see saying that, no, you can't just have negative freedom. You also have to have that positive state push for positive freedoms and so on. And it's like, okay, fine. I come across that at least semi-regularly. What I cannot tell you is that I have ever come across an accidental liberal or an accidental capitalist in the EFF or in the ANC. That has just never, ever, ever, ever happened. Like in all my dealings, I have never come across an ANC guy who says that, yeah, actually the freedom of the individual is kind of the predominant objective of public policy, and then made his superiors cringe and be like, oh, we can't have this guy saying this. I see that in the DA. I've never seen that in the ANC or the EFF. And that's kind of what I mean, is that there is at least this latent prioritization of inculcating these ideological values in those parties, which I think the DA specifically avoids. They specifically want to avoid doing that because they don't want to be seen to be overstepping that kind of line between party and state on the one hand, and on the other hand they have this overriding desire to be seen as these pragmatists who don't get hung up on theory, and we get things done. And I think that is something that really it doesn't help. It's actually destructive. So I actually agree with you, Jake, that the ANC doesn't kind of give them the books and so on, but there is something happening there that leads to more ideological consistency.
So if I can interject just before we get back to you, Zakes, I think that perhaps there is ideological training in the DA. The problem is they're not consistent about it at all, because a lot of DA officials, they're educated, they are participating in the global political sphere. They very likely follow US elections, European elections. They've read about this stuff. The problem is, as you mentioned, Martin, there's no consistency. When an ANC member or official might not know why they're following this or who they're following, but they at least know that there's a certain list of prohibited things they should follow. And I think that in general, we know that the broad ideology of the ANC isn't really socialism. It's probably more of a sense of African nationalism. It's just that the people at the top have shoved in that socialism and made it the prevailing ideology.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, because like if you think of those anecdotal accounts of Zakes' mates who happen to work for the CIJ, like they're like fish in water. Like the ANC has done a very good job of creating an ideological hegemony of socialist interventionist statism, to the extent that even DA or bureaucrats working in DA municipalities just kind of reflexively say that we need to achieve transformation. Like that word is such a loaded word, but it's kind of so casually thrown out, like, oh, obviously we need to do what's good for transformation, without even really interrogating it. So I think people of various ideological persuasions are also motivated by different things. There's status, there's material advantage, there's ideological objectives. So people are pursuing different things simultaneously and with varying levels of intensity. But I think this kind of speaks to why the battle of ideas work is so important, because it's upstream from all of the other kind of policy and governance decisions that happen. And so, if you think of, race-based affirmative action, it's just kind of given as an end unto itself. That is intrinsically good. And try voice critical opinions on that, and you'll see people very swiftly come back at you like you're questioning whether the sky is in fact blue and grass is green. So I think it's an open question whether people are kind of these pure ideologues or not. But I think the ideology does matter as the kind of guiding framework.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess, Martin, first, I agree with you, right? There is something happening there. That is why ANC policies are being affected at like the practical municipal level, but like the other part of that is that the ANC, given the nature of our state, makes laws that everyone must comply with, whether they are in a DA municipality or not. I think that to be able to accurately judge, especially the DA itself, would be to look at the actual reality on the ground to their municipalities, even at a demographic level, because that is what you have to do in SA, reflect other municipalities that are run by the ANC. Is there a difference? And if there is, then I think they should be given the benefit of the doubt at that level. I'm sure we should look at, I guess, that guy. The implication of him complaining is that even at Stellenbosch, even with him being in charge, right, these also horrible, competent white guys were still getting hired, and he did not like that. And I think there's something to be said about that, because if you maybe compared to any other ANC-run municipality, one in the Eastern Cape, I doubt that there is even a history or a complaint to be made about the lack of transformation at those municipalities. So, the politics by its nature, and you mentioned something about how, there are no accidental capitalists in the ANC. I'd be like, man, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Just like at a broader level, right? Think of, President Mbeki, horrible instituted welfare, also was openly embracing of the power of markets and saying, hey, these work. We're going to use these to grow our markets. We're going to use this to grow our economy. We're going to try and attract foreign direct investment. At the very least, we can agree that he was of a different ideological stream than maybe a president like, President Zuma, for instance, right? So that in the ANC exists. You can only think of the variety within said party itself, because they term themselves as a broad church. So I think that since we can agree that there is no strict ideological rudimentation that is, insisted upon on the members of any party, I would like to think, even maybe you would say the EFF, right? Because they are pretty huge on that. But even in the EFF, you would find a whole lot of confused molecules, as I call them, who are small businesses are great. And I'm like, but Marx hates private property. So what is your whole reasoning, right? But that exists. So I don't think you can ever find for something as big as a political party this strict adherence to ideological consistency, because it would be just impossible. There's too many people, even within liberalism itself, right? So there are socialist libertarians. People are anarchists who are socialists. And when I say I'm an anarchist, they are also I'm also an anarchist, right? What do you do about that? Yeah, if they help and gonna vote for you as a political party in the DA, then you want to take their votes. Or you democratic socialist, cool. If there is a inflection point or intersection, to use the language of the old left, right? If there's an intersection where you meet with a democratic socialist, or with someone who, and the difference is not as wide as someone who would vote for the AFF, where they're okay, they're there's nothing within this bevy of ideas, even when you have things like democratic socialism with welfare that I identify with. I just want a totally different model of running the state. Then, of course, it's it's not reconcilable. But if like there can still be some form of reconciliation, like, nah, I believe in individual autonomy, even I understand it differently, but we can argue about that. I think that should be cherished, and that is not something, especially given our context in South Africa, it isn't something that we should like be looking to get rid of. But also there's the other side of it. There like more, of course, can be done, but I just think that like let us look at the results of where they are governing, and it's good that they are responding to this as they should, and probably get to fire the guy. But yeah, I think the results should speak for them rather than like, you know, this guy who is clearly, you know, an ideologue on his own self, and he's being dealt with. So, you know, like yeah, and I'm defending the DA. Again, I'm always defending the DA when I'm talking to Martin, so that's great. That's great. That's true.
Somebody needs to.
So I guess
Yeah, look,
I guess
just kind of my final thoughts on this. So yeah, one thing that I just need to clarify, and this is something that often is thrown at my feet, and I think I might be communicating it very kind of badly, but like I don't expect strict adherence to liberalism. Like I'm an ideologue. I am a self-proclaimed ideologue. I understand liberalism. I get all the kind of nooks and crannies. I don't expect that of anyone. I don't want anyone to kind of just kind of trying to be that into it. My expectation for a liberal party is to just get the bare minimums, like the free market foundation's 4 principles are individual liberty, free enterprise, private property, and limited government. Those 4 things mean different things to different people, but I at least expect those 4 things to be the core of any liberal political party. And when you ask someone who not votes for the party, I think anyone, if you're a party, you want everyone to vote for you, not the people who vote for it, but the people who represent it must be able to at least say something slightly insightful about those 4 things and justify how their views gel with those 4 things. So I don't want strict adherence, certainly from the DA, on the nooks and crannies of liberalism. And then just the second thing is that yes, you're right. We would want them to do more. So I agree with you that there's no political party that has this kind of consistently ideological representation from its members. Yes, because it is big and it's also a complex system to a large degree. But I see more of it. From other parties than I see from the DA. And I recently did some research on Gordon Hill Lewis specifically and the DA in Cape Town. And to my kind of horror, I discovered that years ago already, I think 2 years ago, something like that, the leader of the ANC in the council in Cape Town resigned from the ANC and joined the DA. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I'm sure that person lost their seat in the council and then kind of went through a process to kind of just kind of train in the party and then kind of stood for election again. No. They resigned from the ANC, and the next minute they were a DA councillor in the Cape Town City Council. The same thing happened, not with the leader, but with a councillor of the EFF, I think earlier this year or late last year. And the DA was always smiles. It's like, yay. So something is missing. So there's a step missing. And that step is not to kind of enforce strict ideological kind of adherence, but there's something more that could be done that the DA specifically is not doing, and that is my worry. So I agree with you, Zach. I think you're right that there's these parties aren't perfect representatives of one view of their worldview. I just think that some of them are doing more than the DA could be doing. So yeah, that would be my last thought on that.
I think the main thing that this has made me think is that the ideologies of the ANC aren't actually socialism and nationalism, and the ideology of the DA isn't actually classical liberalism. It's the ANC's prevailing ideology is the ANC is the dominant authority and needs to remain the dominant authority, and the ideology of the DA is anyone but the ANC. And I think that's too vague, and it's what leads to a lot of there's little milquetoast problems that we have with the DA. But as we come up to the end of the hour, are there any closing statements?
Yeah, look, I would just point across the Atlantic Ocean to our friend Javier Milei, who's very much an ideologue and also successfully executing his political program. And I think you can do both. So I also think maybe as a criticism of the DA, there's maybe too much of an eagerness to concede to reality. And in that interview with Andre de Ruyter that I mentioned, he accused me of bearing a grudge against reality, which is something I do very often. But, I think, you might look at, say, some of the neoliberal reforms that occurred during the Mbeki administration as being kind of concessions to the global reality in some ways. But, I feel like perhaps maybe as a criticism of the DA, they're a bit too eager, too swift to jettison some of their principles and say, oh, yeah, look, we might be classical liberals, but, like, hey, we've got to be pragmatic here. And, we're in a unity government, and, we've inherited a whole lot of civil servants from the ANC. So I guess we just got to kind of muddle through. And I think maybe a bit more assertiveness about their values and saying, like, actually, we reject transformania as a guiding ideology. Like, we're going to have a bias towards keeping taxes low rather than hiking up the rates just to meet our delivery needs. We're going to work within our means here. We're going to try and keep the state out of your life instead of trying to determine when you can drink alcohol or what other kind of things you can do in your backyard. So I think I would implore the DA to be a bit more self-confident in its ideological beliefs. And politics is sometimes a messy game. Like, it attracts some weird and wonderful characters. And so not everybody's going to be on the same song sheet, but you got to have like a framework and a program. And it actually makes governance easier because it helps you to clarify your decision-making processes if you know what your underlying value set is.
Yeah, I mean, great point from David. I think Nicholas made a great point about how, like, I don't think the ideology of the DA is liberalism, nor of the ANC, like socialism or nationalism, because, like, more, I think for a political party, right, like the DA takes itself relatively seriously. It has liberal roots, but they are guiding, for instance, their policy document, right? Their policy document has a commitment to SDGs, as you said, David, and SDGs, or to trying to meet SDGs, and that will involve a whole lot of like state expenditure. And Martin mentioned something about how he expects them to stick to something like the limited government. I'm like, there's a huge part of the DA, people who call themselves democratic socialists, right? People who voted for the policy for meeting the SDGs, for having some form of social welfare. Like, all these things are kind of at a clash with, like, the principle of limited government and the point David just made of, like, standing firm on your values and wanting to lower taxes. I'm like, maybe you can try and have the two, because politics is generally like that. You can be contradictory depending on how you say things. They can pass, but I think using the policy document as a guiding light of the ideology, right? You get to see that, like, us as the Market Foundation, of course, would like, the DH be like, yo, let them be libertarians, keep taxes low, slash all form of spending, all form of unnecessary spending, which really would be like, a whole lot of it. We have an entire plan. We go through this all the time, but for them, their guiding principles are located in the policy document their members voted for. And that is what would guide them until the next conference, where they will have a policy discussions again. So I think then we have to judge them. I think if we want to be fair, on the basis of, are they meeting those prescripts? Of course, as we want to influence them, want to bring them further to the side of liberty, and we know that there are people within. That's why we try to influence them, because we know there's a possibility of that. But they are also, running, I guess, their own ship. And if we were to say that you failed, right, instead of judging them by, the prescripts of Hayek, which, by the way, I want to judge everyone on those prescripts. But, we have to at least judge them on the standards they set for themselves. And I think that will help, at the very least, deal with the frustration that we sometimes may have with them, because the frustration, I think, stems from a lack of congruency, for lack of a better term, between what the DA says it wants and what we want it to want. for our country to be prosperous. So yeah, I guess that is my closing remark.
And if the DA is a ship, then we should be the tugboat pulling them in the direction
the
of
other
liberty.
side, yes, but with full cognizance that they are a ship and we are trying to pull them to the other side, right? So yeah,
Tugboats are pretty powerful, man.
That's true. I mean, yeah, I think we'll make a pretty tough as
They're
tugboat,
small, but
so.
you don't want to mess with them, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so yeah, my final thoughts on that. Look, for me, the reason I kind of am so interested in what the DA does is not because kind of I'm part of the media bandwagon of, oh, it's this this white party, this hangover from apartheid that we need to kind of keep an extra eye on and criticize everything that they do as somehow backwards. But because you can draw a direct line from Adam Smith, you can draw it from through Dr. John Phillip, you can draw it through Saul Solomon, Jan-Hendrik Hofmeyr, Ray Swart, Colin Eglin, Helen Suzman, all the way to the DA as it stands here today. The DA is the political embodiment of the liberal tradition in South Africa. Same way you draw Simon van der Stel right through to the National Party. There is something to be said for heritage and legacy, and the DA, whether it likes it or not, I must add, whether it likes it or not, it carries that torch in our politics for liberalism. And while yes, they have their member conferences and so on, I find it to be problematic if they abandon that without just saying it. And I've said this before: if the party comes out and says, "Listen, we're done with this notion of freedom and kind of liberty and free enterprise and private," like, that's just not for us. We buy into this grand vision of SDGs and the nanny state and so on. I mean, I would be upset about that, but that would give me some closure. That would give me a lot of closure. I would then say, okay, cool. That the book is now closed. The book is now closed, and then I will proceed to engage with all these guys on Twitter who say proud DA member .liberal and kind of classical liberal, and I'll be like, what are you doing? Like, you're in the wrong place here. So that would help. But the DA wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to be able to claim this mantle of liberalism. And if you engage with the most senior leaders in the party, privately at least, they will tell you about how important it is to have this liberal voice in politics and kind of, or liberal is and liberal this and liberal that. And then you just see that not reflected. And I think, yeah, Zakes, you're right that they are to a large degree bound by, I mean, obviously bound by the votes of their members during conferences. But I would encourage them. I mean, we do that work, as you've said. We were the tugboat. I think we're also the fare-paying members on the boat, or we're the people who put our cargo on the boat, and we tell the boat where to go. So that's also an important part of it. But the DA itself, its leadership, must also lead as from a perspective of ideas, from a perspective of vision. They mustn't go to the conference and say, hey, what about the SDGs? They should go to the conference and say, yes, we're bound by what you decide, but please do consider that we should rather adopt the economic freedom of the world standards rather than the SDGs, or the Freedom House is even better. I mean, Freedom House is a bunch of normies. Like, go with Freedom House's standards, or the Cato Institute's Human Freedom Index. Like, there's all these things that the DA's leadership should be providing leadership on to its own members when they vote in these conferences. I just don't see enough of that, and there's more of it now than during the Maimane years, but it's still completely inadequate in my view. And I want the DA to do well. I want the DA to be good. I don't like attacking the DA. I want it to be better. So I feel like I have a vested interest as a voter and as a liberal in this political party, getting closer to these values. And just to connect it with the topic we actually discussed, I think non-racialism is such a low-hanging fruit aspect of it, that you don't have to overthink anything. You just need to, if you hire someone into your municipality, like, there should just be one line saying that if we ever get a hint from you that you're a racialist, you're done. They don't do that. So yeah, again, just I think there's more that can be done. and more that isn't being done. And let's hope and let's apply pressure, obviously to the viewers as well. A large portion of who I assume are DA voters as well. Apply that pressure. At least you could say that this party does actually respond to pressure. It does listen. So I would encourage that.
I think in closing, we can say, Martin, you're not angry at the DA, you're just disappointed. So hopefully in the future, we'll see the DA become more decisive, more ideologically consistent. And I think it remains to be seen what they're going to do about their HR manager presently, and also hopefully for future appointments. We can always hope that they put in some more checks and balances when they're appointing these officials. Now, thank you everyone for watching this episode of the Rational Standard podcast. Please remember to like, share, and comment on this video, and to make sure to check out the rationalstandard.com. This has been Nicholas Woode-Smith, Martin van Staden, Zakhele Mthembu, and David Ansara signing out.